Great, thanks very much. Good afternoon all, lovely to see you all here. Big thanks to ADN Capital Foundation, who's the host of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, for putting that video together. So very warm welcome to the side event this afternoon. As you can see, it's titled Wildlife Crime Has Devastating Impacts, How Enhanced International Cooperation Can Prevent and Combat These Serious Crimes. Today's event is sponsored by Brazil, co-sponsored by Angola, Costa Rica and Peru, four beautiful and biodiverse rich countries. And it's also co-sponsored by 16 other organisations, including the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, which I chair. And these are the other sponsoring organisations you can see on the slide. Many of them are here, but there's too many to mention. Now, today's side event is going to continue a critically important conversation on how we can strengthen international cooperation to tackle wildlife crimes, including on the merits of a potential protocol or protocols to the UNTOC. What I'd like to do is very briefly take us through a story of how we got to where we are today. Now, this conversation got real momentum back in April 2021 when the presidents of Gabon and Costa Rica jointly called the adoption of a global agreement on preventing and combating wildlife trafficking, taking the form of an additional protocol. And this was then supported by the presidents of Angola in September 2021 and of Malawi in February 2022. And the European Commission also publicly expressed its support for a potential additional protocol covering wildlife trafficking back in 2022. Now, in May of 2022, this topic entered the formal work program of the CPCPJ through the adoption by consensus of Resolution 31.1. And this was originally submitted by Angola, Kenya and Peru. And this historic resolution invited member states to provide the UNODC with their views on possible responses, including on an additional protocol to the UNTOC, to address any gaps that may exist in the current international legal framework to prevent and combat illicit trafficking of wildlife. This resolution was co-sponsored by 12 states, and as I said, it was adopted by consensus. Then between February and December of 2023, the UNODC collected the views of 76 states and the European Union, and they compiled them and analysed them in a report that was presented to the CPCPJ in May of this year. And today's panel session will, amongst other things, explore the results of that process. Now, the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime has worked with states and supported states and many partners over the past 4 years to advance this discussion, including through a series of 4 insightful side events that were held here in Vienna since 2020, including one at the 33rd session of the CPCPJ in May of this year, titled Benefits of an Additional Protocol to the UNTOC, Lessons Learned from the Existing Protocols. And now this critically important conversation has found its way back to the UNTOC through today's side event and several others. And we just had one with Lisa just a few moments ago. And more importantly, through the consideration of a draft resolution on enhancing measures to prevent and combat crimes that affect the environment, falling within the scope of the UNTOC and the protocols there too, which has been submitted by Brazil, France and Peru. Now, if this resolution is adopted, it could launch an open-ended intergovernmental expert group to prepare a report on how parties can best further advance this issue. I might say we warmly welcome this draft resolution. However, we would like to take the opportunity to say that we should not try and homogenise these crimes. They quite clearly have a common thread, but we should also recognise that they are different in terms of their scale, nature and impacts, including their transboundary impacts. Our initiative is of the view that the draft resolution should recognise this difference and also recognise the extraordinary efforts of presidents, ministers and diplomats over the past decade to advance efforts to tackle wildlife trafficking. For example, the resolution could reference the 6 UN General Assembly resolutions on wildlife trafficking adopted since 2015. There are a critical role played by rangers in tackling crimes that affect the environment, especially wildlife crimes. This was first acknowledged by the UNGA in the resolution it adopted on wildlife trafficking in 2019, and to recognise the historic CPCJ Resolution 31.1 that I just referred to. I should say that our initiative looks at wildlife to include all wild fauna, flora and fungi, animals, plants and fungi. We don't disaggregate wildlife from timber from fish. In our space, we view it all as wildlife, but we do note that states tend to do otherwise and to disaggregate wildlife from timber from fish. That's why the conversation sometimes heads down the path of do we require one or more additional protocols to the UNTOC. So colleagues, today's side event aims to amplify our understanding of the industrial scale, the massive value and the staggering impacts of wildlife trafficking. And our wonderful lineup of speakers will highlight all these issues and of the need to strengthen international cooperation to prevent and combat these crimes, including through considering the benefits of an additional protocol or protocols to the UNTOC. Now, we'll move to our first speaker. I am delighted to welcome Vanessa Negrini. Vanessa is the Director of the National Department of Animal Rights and Protection, the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change of Brazil. Vanessa.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, you are facing global crisis that transcends borders and threatens not only biodiversity, but the very survival of life as you know it. Transnational crimes against fauna and flora are not just attacks on the environment, they are assaults on ecological balances, public health, and national security. Every trafficked species and every destroyed forest weakens global conservation efforts and opens doors to new pandemics and economic instability. On behalf of the Brazilian government and the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, it's an honor to sponsor this event. We can discuss global efforts to combat crimes that affect the environment. In the past 50 years, the world has lost 73% of this biodiversity. And to revive these trends, coordinated actions are necessary, such as reforming food systems, accelerating these transitions to clean energy, redirect investments to restore biomes, and combating environmental crimes. In Brazil, more than 1,200 species of fauna and over 3,000 species of plants are threatened with extinction. The challenges are immense, but Brazil is facing them with determination. We are combating illegal mining and have already removed more than 20,000 miners from the Yanomami's lands, where mining has poisoned our rivers and attacked our wildlife. We are reversing national legislation in strict and control over the gold trade to trace its origin. Our operation against wildlife trafficking resulted in the seizure of over 60,000 animals per year. Through international cooperation, is having managed to repatriate many trafficked animals. We have resumed the action plan for the prevention and control deforestation in the Amazon, with new regulatory framework and enforcement actions. Brazil is proposing the creation of a new fund for the protection of tropical forests to research sustainable financing and global cooperation. The Brazilian government has also active the Green Grant Bolsa Verde program, an initiative that provides economic support to around 50,000 vulnerable families in the Amazon, with the goal of promoting environment conservation and combating illegal practices. We have updated the National Biodiversity Action Plan with ambitious goals to combat environmental crimes and promote animal rights. We are also launching Pacifauna, a word that represents peace and fauna, to integrate Brazilian agencies responsible for combating wildlife crimes. Indigenous leader Ailton Krenak of Fisheries. The earth is a living organism and everything within it, animals, plants, mountains, and rivers, is part of it. When we destroy nature, we are destroying ourselves. His wisdom guides our actions. As one of the most biodiverse nations in the world, Brazil is at the forefront of this battle. However, the criminal network exploiting our wildlife and forests operate internationally, and our responses must be equally global. Strengthening international cooperation frameworks with common language on environmental crime is essential. This is why Brazil advocating for this establishment of additional protocols to the UNTOC to address crimes that affect the environment. There is no time to lose. There is no time to lose. We are grateful to global initiative to end wildlife crime. I'm very grateful to the Brazilian mission in Vienna, Ambassador Nelson Oliveira, Minister Cesar Bonamigo, and Secretary Rodrigo Bertoglio. In Brasilia, Ambassador Marcelo Delanina and the Coordinator for Combating Transnational Illicit Activities, Gustavo Carneiro. I would like to conclude with the words of Minister Marina Silva. She said, long life the rights of any us, animal, and us. For we are all animals. Because the fate for animals and the environmental is always a fight for human life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, and thank you to Brazil. And Vanessa, your passion for the subject matter just comes through your words and the way you deliver them. So thanks very much for getting us off to such an extraordinary start. It's now my great pleasure to introduce to you Ambassador Lilian Bayon. She's the representative of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Peru in the high-level group of the Andean Community Resolutive Action Plan to combat transnational organised crime. Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you. Mr. John Escano, President of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, dear participants. I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Peru at this important event. I would also like to acknowledge the concern and dedication with which the government of Brazil, together with Costa Rica, Angola, and Peru, as well as numerous civil society organizations, have organized this public event. We believe that the 12th session of UNTOC is a very important framework to reflect on modalities for strengthening international cooperation and our multilateral regimes in order to prevent and combat crimes against the environment based on a better understanding of the link between wildlife trafficking and the loss of biodiversity, the impact it generates on natural resources and ecosystems, the damage it causes to local economies that are based on such resources, as well as the risk of zoonotic diseases that such trafficking generates. Today, we particularly recall the adoption by the Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice of Resolution 31/1 on strengthening the international legal framework for cooperation to prevent and combat the illicit trafficking of wildlife, jointly presented by Peru, Angola, and Kenya, which had had to a co-sponsorship of Gabon, Malawi, Ghana, Honduras, Ecuador, Colombia, Mozambique, United States, Paraguay, and Morocco. It is well known that the global trade of wildlife is the fourth most lucrative illicit market, surpassed only by the illicit drug trade, smuggling, and the trafficking of persons. Without a doubt, this is a matter of crucial importance and concern for all United Nations member states, particularly those like Peru, that have been endowed by great biological diversity and encompass very fragile ecosystems. According to the 2024 World Wildlife Crime Report by the UNODC, this type of crime generates an illegal trade in 162 countries and territories, affecting around 4,000 species of flora and fauna. This trade, according to United Nations data, mobilizes between $7 and $23 billion annually. In Peru alone, it is estimated that this criminal economy generates around $150 million annually, without considering the illegal fishing and the illegal logging of wood, which would multiply by 13 this income. These impacts are not limited to the economic sphere, but that is the transfer of to an illegal sector of the economy, which is detrimental to its legitimate and sustainable use by the state and its population. But it also empowers this illegal sector, questioning the validity of the law and challenging those called to apply it, weakening the governance of our states and generating networks of corruption, extortion, and related crimes that threaten the lives and the rights of local communities. In addition, this trafficking affects the viability of ecosystems and biomes, contributing to the loss of biodiversity, one of the elements of the triple crisis that we have faced globally, along with climate change and contamination. In the social sphere, distorted and violent models of coexistence are generated, particularly in geographically remote sectors where the scope of action of the law enforcement and justice agents is weakened, and this affects vulnerable sectors such as indigenous communities, rural populations, the informal sectors, children, women, youth, and the elderly. In this context, in November 2023, Peru assumed the chairmanship of the South America Wildlife Enforcement Network, SUDWEN, and initiated the work for this network to operate effectively at a regional level in order to strengthen cooperation and dialogue among its then current members, with the aim of enforcing the laws and combating the illicit trafficking of wildlife in the region. Under Peru's chairmanship, very recently, between October 2nd and 4th, we held the first annual meeting of SUDWEN, adopted its 2024-2025 action plan, and committed the support of the UNODC and USA to begin implementing some of its actions. We intend to hold a donor roundtable soon to boost the execution of the action plan and invite other governments and agencies to support us. SUDWEN operates based on collaboration, information exchange, and coordinated actions by the competent and state actors in each of the areas in which we face this crime, from prevention to the prosecution and processing of those criminals. Nationally, SUDWEN teams comprise local authorities, sites and forestry authorities, park rangers, customs and port agents, various ministries, and especially the police and the public prosecutors, which in the Peruvian case are specialized in environmental matters. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you to Peru for the extraordinary leadership here in Vienna through the CPCPJ, being co-sponsor of Resolution 31.1 and through co-sponsoring the resolution here at the UNTOC. And I don't know if you're all familiar, but Ambassador was talking about the Wildlife Enforcement Network in South America that Peru is chairing, extraordinary work it does across the continent there. So thank you very much, Ambassador, for being with us and for your remarks. It's now my great pleasure to move to our third speaker, Irene Mansell. Irene is the second secretary of the Permanent Mission of Angola in Vienna. Irene, thank you.
Thank you, John. Excellencies, esteemed delegates, distinguished guests. It's a great pleasure for me to join you today. Angola has the honor of co-sponsoring such an important side event on the merger of the UNTOC COP, together with governments of Brazil, Peru, and Costa Rica, and with the support of the Global Initiative to Stop Wildlife Crime and 15 civil society organizations. Distinguished delegates, wildlife crime has a devastating impact, causing incalculable damage to nature and also endanger livelihoods, the extinction of animal and plant species, water and soil contamination, ecosystem imbalancing, environmental degradation, quality of life, and public health. Organized criminals are depriving local communities of precious natural resources, causing major economic losses to our national economy and frustrating our efforts to preserve wildlife species for future generations. More than 1 million species of animals and plants are facing extinction, many of them within decades. Wildlife trafficking, which includes fishing and illegal logging, is a major factor in the overexploitation of species. It is one of the largest and most lucrative criminal activities worldwide and knows no international borders. It is a international and organized crime that affects all continents. Despite the highly destructive impact of wildlife trafficking on both people and nature, the international response to these crimes remains woefully inadequate. Wildlife trafficking is not directly addressing in any international legal instrument, and there is also no legally binding global instrument that includes an agreed definition of wildlife crime. The existence of such a definition is important, as it could facilitate the convergence of national approach to establishing domestic criminal offenses that would support efficient international cooperation in preventing and combating wildlife trafficking. We need a specific legal instrument or in the form of an additional protocol or protocols to the UNTOC, which provides specific obligation for preventing and combating these crimes and which automatically trigger the UNTOC instrument for cross-border cooperation in wildlife trafficking cases and provides a lasting platform for reviewing progress. Distinguished delegates, the Angolan state has adopted legislative and institutional measures aimed to guarantee the prevention and effective combating of environmental crimes in order to respond to the adaptability and the agility of the illegal wildlife trade. We are aware that this requires strong targeted intervention on both the demand and supply sides of the wildlife trafficking chain and efforts to reduce criminal incentives and profits, as well as greater investment in data analysis and monitoring capacities. Despite the challenges, Angola achieved improvements in preventing and combating wildlife trafficking with the incorporation of specific rules on environmental crimes into Angolan Penal Code, typified as a crime of aggression against the environment and pollution, which carries a prison sentence of 6 months to 12 years. In addition, the Angolan government has adopted the following measures: the closure of the internal market, which facilitated the ivory trade, the approval of conservation areas law, acquisition of ivory capture scanners at heliports and ports, approval of the special carrier regime of environmental conservation areas, officials and inspection agents, the ban on the import and export of live wildlife animals for commercial purpose without prior authorization, the prohibition of the slaughter in natural territory of protected species of wild fauna and flora. The Angola government recognized the complexity of identifying and investigating this type of crime. In this regard, has worked to provide capacity building to the judges and prosecutors in the field of wildlife crime. To ensure the effective management of conservation areas and strategies to reduce illegal wildlife trade and poaching, Angola created National School for Environmental Inspectors, which is located in Luanda, in the Kisama National Park. In addition to these actions, various projects and activities are on the way to combat environmental crime, such as the project to combat illegal wildlife trade and human-wildlife conflicts in Angola, the project to develop investigative and prosecutorial capacity to protect Angolans elephants, program for the protection and rehabilitation of the giant black sable, program to restore and monitor the population of giant sable antelope in the Kangandala and Luando National Parks. Distinguished delegates, the government of Angola has been at the forefront of these efforts to prevent and combat illegal wildlife trafficking through the international legal framework and remains committed to preventing and combating wildlife trafficking at national and international level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Irina, and thank you for the extraordinary leadership of Angola, as you said, not just here in Vienna and internationally, but domestically, all the extraordinary work you're doing. And Angola actually has sponsored or co-sponsored all of the 5 side events that have been dedicated to this topic since 2020. So really very much appreciate that. We're now going to move to our next speaker, Susan Lilas. Susan is the Executive Vice President of the International Conservation Caucus Foundation Group, and Susan has been with the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime right from the beginning, when we were just thinking about it, and we're delighted to have Susan with us today. Over to you.
Thank you, John. Ambassadors, distinguished guests, esteemed delegates. The International Conservation Caucus Foundation works with governments and parliaments around the world to support their conservation and development priorities. And we work through parliamentary conservation caucuses in 23 countries, supporting and empowering them to introduce legislation that advances conservation governance around the world. John, as you mentioned, the conversation within the UN on how to prevent and combat transnational wildlife trafficking was launched with the joint presidential statement from Gabon and Costa Rica in 2021, in which they called for a new global agreement to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking, taking the form of an additional protocol to the UNTOC. In their joint statement, the president said that given the scale of the risks to people and planet, we simply cannot stand by and watch wildlife continue to disappear without strengthening our collective response, which includes international laws for combating and preventing wildlife crime. Gabon and Costa Rica were later joined by the presidents of Angola and Malawi. President João Lourenço announced Angola's commitment verbally in Washington, D.C. at the ICCF U.S. Congressional International Conservation Gala in September of 2021. And His Excellency Dr. Lazarus McCarthy Chakwera, of President of Malawi, announced his commitment by stating that wildlife crime is a highly organized transnational phenomenon, and no single country can successfully eradicate this on its own. All 4 presidents highlighted the impacts of these crimes, which the World Bank, as many of us know, has valued at between $1 and $2 trillion annually, as well as the loss of government revenue of up to $12 billion annually. This critically important topic has achieved significant momentum and progress due to the strong leadership of states. This includes the adoption of the groundbreaking CCPCJ Resolution 3011, which John referred to earlier, where states were asked to provide their views on possible responses to address any gaps in the international legal framework. The report published by UNODC in May of this year collected views of 77 states and the European Union. It showed that more than half of respondents have a positive view of a potential protocol, additional protocol to the to UNTOC, with some states expressing a view that they would like to see the scope of a protocol expanded to include other crimes that affect the environment. So in an effort to support further the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime conducted our own independent analysis of the rich content of the responses. This work was led by its host organization, ADM Capital Foundation, and I'd like to briefly highlight some of the main findings. From our analysis, we found that 89% of states stated that they are either in favor of an additional protocol to UNTOC on illicit trafficking in wildlife or are open to discussing it. When it comes to the international legal framework, 72% of states either explicitly noted gaps in the international legal framework or recognized there were issues, or while suggesting that if there were no gaps, there were still insufficiencies. Several states also recognized the enforcement challenge posed by the exclusion of the vast majority of species of wild animals and plants from the current international wildlife trade controls provided by CITES, which is something that Juliana will highlight. An additional protocol to UNTOC could address this gap by including all nationally protected and endemic species within the scope of a protocol, which could have a major beneficial impact, especially for source countries rich in biodiversity. Some states said a new protocol could present an opportunity to spotlight other crimes that affect the environment, such as illegal mining, land conversion, and the trafficking of waste. Another very frequently highlighted issue was insufficient transnational cooperation with a lack of provisions regarding mutual legal assistance, extraditions, joint investigations, and special investigative techniques. The sharing of information was also emphasized as critical. Some states said that so far information sharing has proved to be unsatisfactory. It needs to be enhanced to support more effective collaborative transboundary efforts to tackle wildlife trafficking. 80% of responding states highlight the advantage of adopting standardized definitions, for example, of wildlife trafficking, and a convergence of international agreements and national legislation regarding wildlife trafficking investigations and MLA procedures. This would more effectively strengthen enforcement efforts. Some states pointed out that triggering UNTOC provisions through a protocol will further standardize transnational penalization measures, sanctions, special investigative techniques, and definitions of terminology related to wildlife trafficking. The majority of states acknowledge the potential advantages that a new protocol could bring to the fight against wildlife trafficking. As was highlighted at the side event at the CCPJ in May this year, titled Benefits of an Additional Protocol to the UNTOC, Lessons Learned from Existing Protocols, the UNTOC makes provision for and anticipates additional protocols. Only through enhanced coordinated and collaborative efforts can we have an impact on a global scale. An additional protocols could serve as a powerful tool to strengthen international cooperation as well as national action. For the past few years, as we've heard and most of you know, several states have spearheaded efforts to consider adopting an additional protocol to the UNTOC on preventing and combating wildlife trafficking, and they have made a powerful case for doing so. As I mentioned, in 2022, the CCPCJ adopted the historic Resolution 31-1, which elicited the views of many states discussed above. There is an opportunity at this UNTOC COP to continue building on these concerted efforts to further advance intergovernmental consideration of this issue. The draft UNTOC COP resolution submitted by Brazil, Peru, and France, which John and others have referred to, provides a unique opportunity to build on this body of work by creating an intergovernmental expert group that can consider the possible benefits of an additional protocols to the UNTOC on crimes that affect the environment, including wildlife crime. ICCF sincerely hopes that the parties to UNTOC decide to move in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thanks to International Conservation Caucus Foundation for the extraordinary work you're doing with so many parliamentary caucuses right across the globe. We're going to come to our last panellist now, a very active and passionate member of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crimes Steering Group, Juliana Ferreira. She's the Executive Director with Freeland Brazil, and she's going to focus her comments a little bit more on the ground, and she has a number of images that she's going to take you through. So over to you, Juliana.
Thank you. Distinguished guests, my name is Juliana Machado Ferreira. I have been specializing in counter-wildlife trafficking for almost 20 years, but I'm originally trained as a conservation biologist. I come from the most mega biodiverse country in the planet, Brazil, which, like too many other countries, is sadly heavily overexploited for its biodiversity, which is not only trafficked for the internal markets, but also transnationally. In most destination countries, with few exceptions, when illegal, non-native wildlife is detected, authorities can act if the trafficker is caught in the act of smuggling, if there are severe violations of animal welfare standards, if there is sanitary risk, or if the species belongs to if the specimen belongs to a species listed in CITES. CITES provides the legal framework for regulating legal international trade in species of wild animals and plants that are listed in its appendices. Nonetheless, many listed species are still heavily trafficked by people who exploit weaknesses in the convention and in its implementation. For example, traffickers make use of fraudulent documents, they launder species such as by falsely claiming they are captive bred when they are wild caught, and they misdeclare different species. And when trafficking is intercepted, the convention does not require states to criminalize these breaches. Because of the low-risk, high-profit perception of these crimes and weak traceability methods, we are witnessing an endless and potentially ever-growing trafficking of flagship species such as golden lion tamarins, Lear macaws, among others. Therefore, while CITES is a valuable convention for regulating the international trade in listed species, which is about 0.5% of the world's species of fauna and flora, it was not designed to, and it does not have the capacity or the tools to combat wildlife trafficking effectively. Furthermore, Brazil, as well as many other source countries, has taken a sovereign decision to protect all of our biodiversity, not just a limited number of species listed under CITES, with requirements for permits to be obtained for almost every use of almost every wild species. People who fail to comply with our laws in our country are penalized administratively and many times judicially. This is critically important, as less than 1% of more than 120,000 species of our wild animals that are protected under our law are subject to some international regulatory control. And I excuse myself, the slide is not the same as I have here. It's just the colors are all different and something technical happened, so I'm so sorry about that. But still, CITES protects less than 1% of our wild animals, and I'm not even mentioning plants. Earlier this year, a group of police, environmental authorities, and myself visited a reptile fair in a European country. We found that several species of our biodiversity were being traded widely. Most of these species were not CITES listed and did not require any certificates or permits to be issued under the Convention for International Trade. As such, according to international law, they were not being traded illegally. These are usually recently described or undescribed species, endemic, with restricted ranges, unknown conservation status, which are highly desired by collectors, hobbyists, or researchers. video here. Can you help me, please, with the video? Thank you. In this example, although several representatives of source countries pointed to likely illegal sourcing of these specimens under their national laws, there was almost nothing the local authorities at the destination island could do. Therefore, in most cases, people can sell worldwide illegally sourced wildlife obtained by breaking a source country's laws without any sanctions in the destination country. This cannot be allowed to continue. Wildlife trafficking impacts the welfare of millions of animals, threatens the survival of species, impacts human economy and well-being, as well as the governance of nations. An additional protocol to the UNTOC covering wildlife crime and possibly other environmental crimes could be used to set out a range of commitments between countries, including to oblige states to criminalize the import of any wildlife or wildlife product that is taken contrary to national laws of the source country. And if a crime is included in a protocol, it automatically triggers the UNTOC's general tools for cross-border cooperation, without the need to make offenses punishable by 4 years imprisonment or more. In my view, based on my experience in Brazil and elsewhere, such a protocol would have the power to revolutionize international cooperative action to counter wildlife trafficking. And I do sincerely hope that parties to the UNTOC feel it in the same way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juliana, an extraordinary presentation and a compelling case you've just made. We have a few moments now before we hand to Brazil, to the ambassador, to make final remarks, to invite some questions. I understand that we have a representative from Costa Rica with us. Oh yes, very good. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Just very quickly, to contribute a little bit to the discussion, Costa Rica is very pleased to co-sponsor this event and join in these efforts to raise awareness about the multi-dimensional impacts that wildlife crime has on our communities and the ecosystems in general, and the importance of, for the global community to adopt concrete actions in this regard. We are very grateful for the valuable input all the panelists have made to this discussion, which underscores the urgency to take action and to address these crimes. Around 1 million species face extinction within decades. Overexploitation and illicit trafficking are the most destructive and destabilizing practices. Wildlife crimes and the demand for wildlife have reached unprecedented levels, as we just saw. We have recognized that among all environmental crimes, wildlife trafficking stands out for its scale, environmental, health, and social impacts, and of course the economic value that has been mentioned extensively. So it is important to meet our global commitments to tackle biodiversity loss, climate change, and the effort to prevent these multifaceted impacts. However, interventions to reduce wildlife trafficking need strong coherence and harmonization, which of course requires a strong international cooperation and global enforcement efforts. As we have recognized that we need to step up these efforts, is that Costa Rica has called for the adoption of this additional protocol, or protocols that we are discussing right now, to address these crimes. So we have taken national actions in order to address this and to actually facilitate the international cooperation in this regard. However, we strongly believe that international instruments in this regard would facilitate that coordination in terms of exchange of information, cooperation on investigations and crime prosecution, which would require the inclusion of a standardization of procedures in law enforcement and mutual legal assistance. So to conclude, I want to commend the leadership that Peru, Brazil, and France have shown and putting forward this resolution. We hope this is the step we need to move forward in strengthening the international framework in this regard. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Thank you, Costa Rica, for the very strong support and co-sponsoring today's event as well. We have time for another question or intervention if anyone would like to take the floor. I'll just have a look around. If not, I'm going to hand over to Brazil. Brazil is the sponsor of today's event, and the last word for today will go to Brazil, to His Excellency Nelson Antonio Tabajara de Oliveira. And Ambassador, I'd like to invite you to come and take my chair here, so that you're in centre stage to make the closing remarks. And I'll just see if I can slide this in here. Great.
Okay, so first of all, let me thank everyone to have joining us here to have such important discussions on the subject that, as you know very well, Brazil, France, and Peru are trying to lead an initiative so that we have a protocol that disciplines, that makes as a tool to enhance international cooperation. So thank you very much, John, for conducting so brilliantly this session, if you can call this a session, and thanks for pronouncing my name right, which is very, very hard. So, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, esteemed colleagues, I would like to thank our co-sponsors, Peru, Angola, Costa Rica, and our dedicated civil society partners for their invaluable contributions to today's event. This rich insights shared by our distinguished speakers have further emphasized the critical need for enhanced global cooperation in the fight against wildlife crime, a matter that transcends national boundaries and is intrinsically linked to a multitude of global challenges. As we have heard today, wildlife crime is a multifaceted and growing threat with severe consequences for biodiversity, sustainable development, human health, and climate change. And should I add, by the pictures that we saw with Juliana's presentation, the inhumane way that these animals mainly are treated. It's heartbreaking. Just that should be a crime in itself, for treating animals the way they are treated by these illicit traders. It also poses significant risk to human health, particularly through viral spillover events, highlighting the urgent need for an instrument that recognizes the interconnectedness of people, animals, plants, and their shared environments. The discussions today have underscored the critical importance of international cooperation in addressing these crimes. Brazil strongly supports the call for an additional protocol or protocols to the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, UNTOC, a framework that would significantly strengthen international legal mechanisms to combat illicit wildlife trafficking. Approving such a protocol or protocols would not only fill existing gaps in the global legal framework, but also provide states with the tools necessary to ensure that wildlife crime is addressed with the gravity it warrants. As we reflect on the findings from the 2024 UN World Wildlife Crime Report, it becomes clear that the illegal trafficking of wildlife affects not only CITES listed species, as was extensively exposed to here today, but also many species that are not covered by existing regulations. This is why it is imperative that destination countries take robust legal actions to criminalize the import of non-CITES species, as highlighted today by today's speakers. In this context, Brazil calls for greater attention to species that are often overlooked but are equally vulnerable to exploitation. Brazil has long been committed to addressing the socioeconomic drivers of wildlife crime. It is essential to recognize that enforcement, while crucial, must be complemented by strategies that address the root causes of these illicit activities. Strengthening community engagement, supporting sustainable livelihoods, and raising awareness are essential components of a comprehensive response. Communities living in or near biodiversity-rich areas are often the first line of defense against wildlife crime, and their empowerment is key to long-term success. Furthermore, the Paris Agreement serves as a crucial platform that can help drive collective action. The linkages between these frameworks and wildlife crime have been made abundantly clear during our discussions. Wildlife trafficking is not only undermines biodiversity, but also fuels environmental degradation, contributing to the very climate crisis we are striving to mitigate. As such, tackling wildlife crime must be integrated into broader climate and biodiversity strategies if we are to achieve our global sustainability goals. At today's event, we have also heard about the importance of regional and international initiatives such as the SUDWEN, presented by Ambassador Baldwin, which promotes collaboration in tackling wildlife trafficking across borders. These efforts demonstrate the power of shared knowledge, expertise, and resources in advancing our fight against wildlife crime. Brazil commends the active participation of all regional actors in these efforts and encourages continued and expanded cooperation. Brazil remains steadfast in its commitment to the CCPCJ Resolution 31.1, which calls for the strengthening of international cooperation to prevent and combat illicit trafficking in wildlife. The report produced by the UNODC on this resolution, as well as the lessons learned from the existing UNTOC protocols, provide valuable guidance for shaping the way forward. We urge all stakeholders to continue to engage in these dialogues, ensuring that our efforts to address wildlife crime remain at the forefront of the global agenda. As we move forward, it is incumbent upon us to ensure that the commitments made here are translated into tangible actions. We must continue to advocate for stronger legal frameworks, deeper international partnerships, and greater investment in both enforcement and prevention. The stakes are too high to allow inertia to set in. In closing, I would like to once again express Brazil's gratitude to all those who have contributed to this vital discussion here today. Together, we can protect our planet and valuable biodiversity, safeguard human health, and ensure a sustainable future for all. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those extraordinary remarks. To close today's session, thank you to you, Ambassador, to Brazil, all the co-sponsors, and to all of you for joining us today. I'll invite all of the panelists to stay up here because we're going to do a group photo. But thanks to all of you. Please join with me in thanking all of our extraordinary panelists for their contributions today.
John?
Oh, there's a question.
Okay. Yes. Porane Caruca, MTUI, boa tarde, todas saudações às forças da natureza. Sou Tainá Marajoara, do estado do Pará, do Brasil. Antes de tudo, gostaria de saudar a missão brasileira e agradecer ao UNTOC pelo convite. Excusa por hablar en español. Sí. No es tanto como una cuestión, pero es más una propuesta que yo saludo la iniciativa brasileña por la Alianza Global de Combate al Hambre, considerando la Alianza Global de Combate al Hambre y todos los esfuerzos desde Brasil para un sistema justo alimentario. Nosotros también proponemos que sea adicionado a estas discusiones que son muchísimo grandes y importantes para todo el mundo, que se tiene como una de las propuestas las implementaciones vinculantes de otras convenciones, como los tratados para propiedad intelectual y recursos genéticos asociados al conocimiento tradicional de los pueblos originarios y de las comunidades locales, así como los esfuerzos para el combate al hambre a partir de los alimentos sanos, considerando que los alimentos sanos también son los alimentos libres de las injusticias, no solo más sanos que los que son con certificaciones burocratizadas, pero sano aquello que garante a nosotros el bem vivir, que garantir el bem vivir es como cuidar de todos nosotros, porque la naturaleza también somos nosotros, las aguas también somos nosotros, y que en todo el painel que podemos también una propuesta con la OME9 de OIT, con todo el sistema internacional de derechos humanos, lo que más que se puede hacer para la protección de la cultura y de la naturaleza, involucrados como el TIRFA, Tratado Internacional para los fitogenéticos, los otros protocolos desde que Brasil es signatario. Y más una vez, agradezco la invitación de UNTOC y parabenizo la misión brasileña. Y hoy es un día muy especial porque es un día que se avanzó con la aprobación de la PLANAPO, el Plano Nacional de la Producción Orgánica, que es también una gran contribución para el combate del crimen organizado, de los crímenes ambientales. Muchas gracias.
I think it was just a statement.
That's good. Gracias.
Did you understand?
Somewhat. Not all. Thank you very much for that intervention, and we look forward to engaging with you following the panel session, and invite all of you to engage with any of the panelists if you'd like. Thank you again for joining us.